was the sermon. We can just go home now. That was beautiful. That was so powerful. Thank you so much for having me here today. I've not been in the position for the last 11 years to visit churches very often and to just kind of come and see what's going on outside of the four walls of my own church, because I was on pastoral staff for the last 11 years in South Auckland, and so my weekends were always there. And so it's really just nice at this point in my life to have changed jobs this year, and so it's just nice to have the opportunity to come and visit and recognise that the extension of God's family, it just goes so far, doesn't it? Right now, I'm very, very aware. I'm just going to have a transparent moment with you. Right now, I'm very aware that the extension of God's family goes around the world, especially for a friend of mine who's at the moment in surgery, having a tumour removed from her brain. So she's in surgery in Southern California, and I'm part of a group on Facebook that's called Praying for Shani Deal. And she's, being prayed for across the world. And just the power of God's family when it extends beyond. This is when Facebook really does come into its own, There's some evils of Facebook, but when it comes to praying for people who need prayer, and when it comes to reaching out and extension of community, then that's when it has a really powerful purpose. So as I preach the gospel, I'm aware that I just really want the gospel to be lived out in that hospital surgery right now. And so, thinking of her, she's on my mind. But it's so nice to be here. Two of my favourite humans, I think, are in the room today. So it's so good to see Bree thriving. First person I ever baptised was Brianna, so it's very special to be here with her. Look, we don't talk about the fact that I tripped over on my way into the water, but it was a special day either way. I just think that Grace Gayton is an amazing church. You're an amazing, warm community. I felt so warmly welcomed. It's so good to be here, seeing what ministry looks like for you guys, Wes, and I really appreciate the invitation. So let's get started. When I was 21 years old, I had finished my third year of my degree at university. I was studying primary school teaching, and I got the opportunity to move to the US, and I didn't know whether I wanted to go or not. I went back and forth, but in the end, I decided to go. First time away from my family in a really significant way. As a 21-year-old, I was getting on a plane to go live in the States on my own. Woohoo, adventure. So I sat down on the plane, and my sister had handed my mum a letter to give to me at the airport and told me that I wasn't allowed to open it until I got on the plane. So I opened this letter on the plane, and I'm reading this letter from my sister. And in the letter, she was telling me a story that she was thinking about our childhood, that I had completely forgotten about. And so you can imagine that I was reading this letter, and I was a mixture of just sobs and laughs at the same time. I think people around me was like, what is wrong with this girl? I was like, couldn't stop laughing, and then I couldn't stop crying. So the story goes like this. She was reminding me of a time we lived in a rural town outside of Albury, and we had to go to school by two buses. One of the buses had a whole bunch of high school students on it. We went to the little Christian primary school. So we had to kind of get on this intimidating bus with all of these high schoolers on it. Then we had to get on the next bus. On this intimidating bus were a couple of bullies. Now, I actually was a bit of a bullied kid. I was pretty timid and I was pretty shy. People that know me now find that hard to believe. But I wasn't great at standing up for myself. My older sisters often did that for me. And so they would stand up for me. But this day on the bus, I was a primary school kid. I might have been 8 or 9. My sister's a few years older than me, and we were having to squish into this seat together. And the bully, I can't even tell you his name. I still remember it. His name was Daniel, and he had a blonde mullet. Okay, he came and he sat down behind us. Now, he started to pull my sister's hair for no reason at all. We good? It's probably just the fold back. It's just me being a diva, right? He starts pulling my sister's hair. My sister's tough. She doesn't cry easily. But I looked across at her, and she just had tears streaming down her face, just tears silently, but she was not going to give in to this bully, and she was not going to let him see her cry. Well, me, who was normally afraid when I was the one being attacked, all of a sudden found something within myself in defense of my sister. You know how that happens? Wouldn't necessarily stand up for myself, but boy, I wasn't going to let anybody else hurt her. So I turned around to this Daniel blonde mullet guy, and I turned around and grabbed his blonde mullet and yanked his hair so hard that his whole head just kind of went to the side like this, and he was shocked. And all of the kids that were around him just cracked up laughing. And because I was just this little girl with this teenage boy, and I just pulled his hair so hard, I did not care. And my sister, with tears streaming down her face, shoulders start shaking because she's laughing so much. And I'm like, don't touch my sister. Determined. And then the guy across the aisle, I think his name was Robbie, he was like the big mouth of the bus. He's like, ha, Daniel, look, you're getting beaten up by a little girl, you know. And so the whole bus kind of erupted, and he just sort of sat there and left us alone. Now, after all of that happened, because I didn't think about it in the moment, but after that all happened, I was thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to get in so much trouble tonight when we're sitting at the dinner table and Dad goes, hey, you know, what happened today? How was your day? So my sister goes on to tell my dad the story that night, and here I am thinking, oh, Dad's going to tell me that you shouldn't respond like that, you shouldn't be a bully, you shouldn't. He turned to me, he goes, good job, mate. And then we just went on with it. Now, I had forgotten the story completely, but the reason I'm telling it to you today is because even though I was smaller, and even though I probably didn't stand a chance against the bully, the mission in that moment to defend my sister was far greater than the cost of anything else that was going to come at me. The mission I had in mind, that this guy had to get his hands off my sister, was far greater than the cost. And I just want to plant that statement inside of your mind just for these next few moments as we talk about this together. The mission was greater than the cost. I didn't care what happened after that. I just cared that he stopped doing what he was doing. There's a story in the book of Luke, in the Gospel of Luke, and it's one of my favourites. It's chapter 5, 17 to 26. Now, in a little minute, the verses will come up on the screen, but for the first time I read it, can I just read it to you? So if you just want to close your eyes and just listen to the story, I want to tell you a little bit about it. It's a bit of a background. Jesus is really at the beginning of his ministry, okay? It's right at the beginning. And the buzz around Jesus is that he's doing some miracles. The buzz around him is that, oh, you know, what's going on? He doesn't really even have all of his disciples yet, okay? So it's right at the beginning of when Jesus started doing things on the planet, and there's a buzz around him. So here it is. We'll start at verse 17, and I'll read it to you. One day, while Jesus was teaching, some Pharisees and teachers of religious law were sitting nearby. It seemed that these men showed up in every village of Galilee and in Judea as well as in Jerusalem. And the Lord's healing power was strongly with Jesus. Some men came carrying a paralyzed man on a sleeping mat. They tried to take him inside to Jesus, but they couldn't reach him because of the crowd. So they went up to the roof and they took off the tiles. Then they lowered the sick man on a mat down into the crowd right in front of Jesus. Seeing their faith, Jesus said to the man, young man, your sins are forgiven. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the religious law said to themselves, who does he think he is? That's blasphemy. Only God can forgive sins. And Jesus knew what they were thinking, so he asked them, why do you question this in your hearts? Is it easier to say your sins are forgiven or to stand up and walk? So I'll prove to you that the Son of Man has the authority on earth to forgive sins. Then Jesus turned to the paralyzed man and he said, stand up, pick up your mat, and go home. And immediately, as everyone watched, the man jumped up, picked up his mat, and went home praising God. Everyone was gripped with wonder and awe, and they praised God, exclaiming, we have seen amazing things today. Okay, that's the story. Okay, if we go back to the top of that, verse 17. One day, while Jesus was teaching, some Pharisees and teachers of religious law were sitting nearby. It seemed these men showed up from all of these places. I just want to stop here for a second. Just stop at this verse for a second. So let's consider who was in the room. It's always important to understand the context. Who was in the room? The cynics were in the room. The judgmental people were in the room. The curious people were in the room. In fact, they could be found wherever Jesus was. Isn't it interesting how things haven't changed? Wherever there's a buzz, anywhere today in the world, you're still going to find the cynics, you're still going to find the curious people, and you're still going to find the judgmental people in every crowd. In fact, it stands to reason that in this room today, we've got some cynics, we've got the people that are curious, and we've got some judgmental people sitting in the room, right? Everybody goes, not the judgmental ones. I'm not the judgmental one, right? So people's testimonies weren't enough to convince them that Jesus was real. They were like, we're hearing things about this guy. We've just got to go check it out for ourselves. That's all good. Jesus does not mind the curious people. He does not mind the cynics, and he does not mind the judgmental people. In fact, he's okay with all people. So in that crowd today kind of signifies what's in any crowd, any day, all the time, anywhere we go, right? So there are those of you today that have come really excited to worship, and there are those of you that hang out on the edges. There's some of you that are sitting there on your phones and you think I can't see you. There are those of you that might be a little bit sleepy. Some of you are whispering up the back, I don't know. Just a mixed bag, really. It's the same with the story. Still in that same verse. And the Lord's healing power was strongly with Jesus. Some men came carrying a paralyzed man on a sleeping mat. Okay, so we have some really important information already. This is kind of like, I'm just going to give you a little inside track to just what it's like to sit down and just do a real, bit of a Bible study. Ask yourself some questions. I'm trying to give you the background of how I pull these things out of the story. So we've got the important information. We need to know what the condition of the man is. Okay, here's the condition of the man. We know that he's sleeping, right? Maybe. He could be. He could just be lying there resting. He's weak. He's paralyzed. He's helpless. Seems like he's bedridden. He couldn't walk into the room himself. He's totally dependent on his friends. He's crowded out. He's actually kept out of the room. And he has really great, determined friends, it seems. This is what we know about the man so far. Anything I've missed? No? Okay, that's what we know about the man. Now, what's our natural response to people that are in this predicament? Somebody that's sick. What's our natural response? Do we say things like, you know what, you should try this. You just need to do this. Hey, if you just had a little bit more faith. Or, why don't you do this, you know? Or we'll tell people how sick you are, and then maybe when they see you, they'll feel sorry for you and let you into the room, you know? Like, we're always trying to come up with some remedies for the people that are sick, or even worse, you know what? Christians have been known to try and tell someone why they were sick, you know, and make it a spiritual thing that it's sick. So we're full of advice and opinion, but here's the question for us. Would we be willing to forego the right to our opinion and be the person that's willing to carry them? Could we be the carriers? This guy had great friends because they were willing to carry him to a place he would not otherwise be able to get there himself, you know? Carrying to the place where there's hope for him. Verse 18 and 19. So they tried to take him inside to Jesus, but they couldn't reach Jesus. Why? Because the crowd had blocked them out. So these guys were like, they must have been Kiwis, eh? Because they're ingenious, you know? They've got the creative thing going on. The Kiwi ingenuity kicks in, and they're like, okay, we're just going to get him into the room somehow. They could have turned away. How often have we, you know, been determined to do something, and as soon as there's one thing blocking us, we're like, oh, well, it's not going to work out today. Off we go. No, the mission was greater than the cost, right? So they're like, all right, well, if we can't get him in that way, we're not going to let the crowd deter us. Some of us just need, I want to pause there because I feel like this is a powerful metaphor. Some of us need to be encouraged by this today because you have ideas and you have things in your life that you need. And when you try to get those things, there's some kind of block. It might not be a crowd. It might be an insecurity. It might be something else that's keeping you away. But that's not the opportunity to turn around and go home and not go for the thing. That's not the absolute sign from everywhere that that's not the thing that you should be doing. That's a moment where you get to tap into, all right, if this is not going to work this way, then I'm going to have to think about another way. Some of you have dreams in your heart that God put there for a reason that are being blocked at the moment, and you're not sure why. But I think maybe if you sit in that moment long enough and think, okay, here's the block, maybe I can get through the roof. Maybe there's another way. And I love that about this story. So let's talk about the man's friends. Let's describe them. They were willing and persistent and determined. They were bold and courageous. They obviously had some humility. They were practical people, capable people. They were also crowded out. They also had a barrier between them and where they wanted to go. They would go to extreme lengths. They weren't discouraged by the crowd, so they had great faith. That was in verse 20. They had great faith. This is interesting. We know something about the man on the mat. We know something about his friends. So they went up to the roof and they started to take off the tiles. They weren't concerned with something. Here's what they weren't concerned with. They weren't concerned with who's going to fix the roof. You think about that. You imagine in the crowd today, something starts happening here. The roof starts to be peeled away. There are going to be people in the room that are like, this is epic, this is awesome, you know? I can't believe this is happening. There are going to be people in the room that are going to be like, oh, great, now who's going to fix the roof? You know? Way more concerned with the building than they are with the person that's coming through the roof in the building in need of Jesus. And sometimes we in Christian communities we can get a little bit the same. We can be way more concerned with our buildings and our structures and our traditions and our things that we hold as sacred that we get a little bit, you know, iffy about whether or not the person's coming through the roof or not. Who should we be focused on? The person trying to come to Jesus. Some of the other stuff needs to just fall into second place, maybe third place or fourth place, you know, but we do. We hold on to these things and we make them our big deal things. Well, this is a lesson for the crowd that day. The big deal thing is the person coming through the roof, not who's going to fix it. Nobody's even discussing who's going to fix the roof. See, they had a mission in mind. Their mission was to get their friend to Jesus, get their friend to a place of hope. And you see, when your concern is for the healing of someone else, the mission is always greater than the cost. The mission is always greater than the cost. In fact, the more it costs you, it's a sign of how important the mission really was. You think about somebody like Corrie ten Boom. She thought the mission was greater than the cost when she hid the Jews from the Nazis, right? She put her own life at risk in order to do that, to save some other people. When the mission is more important than the cost, people don't pause even to weigh the cost in that second. You're not sitting there making a pro-con list, you know, about whether or not we should do this or not. It's like, you know what? We're desperate. This is the thing. This is it. We're convicted. Let's do it. Jesus is our best example of this. Jesus decided that the mission to save his people was far greater than the cost of his own life. His own life. These friends were determined to get to Jesus, and they were deliberate, and they believed that what they had heard previously about Jesus. They weren't the cynical ones. They were the desperate ones. Some of us need to tap into the desperation so we can get rid of our cynicism and recognize that we all have a need for Jesus, right? So they believed what they had heard. They had faith. Okay, if this man is who he says he is, if what we're hearing is true, our whole mission is to get our friend in front of this guy. So there's hope. They were trying to get toward the hope. They were trying to go in the direction of hope. Okay, they didn't form a committee to get permission to change the building. They didn't care that there were people in the room that would be more concerned with that than their friend. They just started pulling the building apart to get their friend in front of Jesus. I don't know, that just hits me hard because I think, when's the last time I pulled the building apart to get somebody in front of Jesus? Have I worked that hard to get someone in front of Jesus? Verse 19 and 20, then they lowered the sick man on his mat down into the crowd right in front of Jesus, seeing their faith. Now I love this. Seeing their faith. Whose faith? The friends. The guy on the mat doesn't talk about anything to do with his faith. Seeing their faith, the faith of the friends, Jesus was impressed with their boldness. I think he liked that they pulled the tiles off the roof, you know? Boy, do we need people like this in our lives, don't you think? Don't we need friends that are willing to rip tiles off roofs to get us where we need to go? And we need to be this friend for people in our lives. Now, some of you might be sitting here today and going, you know, I need some friends like that. And I don't have any friends like that. And I pray that your deep, sincere prayer is that God will kind of source good people to have around you. But I can tell you the most simple cliche rule about this is if you need friends like that, start to be a friend like that. Because if you are a friend like that, you will attract people like that. So if we can be those friends, we can have those friends, right? We all have times where we need someone else to carry us to Jesus. That's why life groups are awesome. You know, because sometimes we can be in those places where we allow people to carry us to Jesus. I have a friend who's so burdened by my burdens that she'll ring me up in the morning and go, I didn't sleep all night because I was thinking about that thing that was going on for you, and I was praying about it, and I felt sick about it, and I was like, well, I slept okay. Why didn't you sleep okay? But she's so into what's going on with me, has the heart for me, so much so that she's so burdened by that she'll lose sleep over my life. That's a pretty unique friendship to have, right? That's a pretty amazing thing to have. And I have to say that I'm probably more concerned with her life than I am with my own sometimes too. And I'll lose sleep over hers. I would hope that any one of my friends who needed help or healing or prayer or support would be able to come to me and just say, Keira, I'm going to get on the mat. Can I have that mat? I forgot to bring up my awesome prop. It's even shiny. It's like a girl's mat. Are you sure it's yours, Wes? It's shiny and glittery. I wonder whether or not I might be able to come up to my friend and go, you know what, I need to get on the mat. I need you to carry me. And I would hope, not wearing the shoes for this, I would hope that my friend would be able to get up on the mat and ask me to carry her. I'm just going to leave that there as a visual reminder. Can you believe it? Okay, Jesus said to the man, young man, your sins are forgiven. But the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law said to themselves, who does he think he is? That's blasphemy. Only God can forgive sins. Here we are, the cynics. Here's the debate. Can you believe it? Jesus actually heals somebody right in front of them. He does the act. He heals somebody right in front of them. But the people in the room that are there out of curiosity and that are there out of cynicism and that are there out of judgment, they start to debate semantics. Do you know what they're thinking about? That's not in the rule book. That's not how we're supposed to forgive. And has he even got the authority to forgive? The miracle happened in front of them, and they're questioning the method of how the miracle happened. Okay, interesting. Jesus can come, and he can heal in ways we don't expect it. And we need to just stay open to the fact that there's a continual revelation of Jesus Christ happening in the world. And he can still do things today that he has never done before. And so before we pause and go, ooh, that didn't happen, that's not how it's supposed to happen, recognize that Jesus is still alive, he's still acting, and he's still transforming lives today, and he's going to meet people where they are at. So to hold this, idea, this formula of how it's supposed to happen is only going to just limit our own faith. See, one group is wondering about Jesus following the rules. And then there's this other group that see the exact same thing and they go, wow, isn't that interesting? They're in the same room, they see the same thing, and somebody goes, wow, while somebody else goes, no. Do you see that happening today? We witness things on the news all around the world all of the time, and you'll have some people that just go, yes, and other people that just go, nope. I wonder how the Lord deals with us. We are just hard work, aren't we? We're just so polarized half of the time. Others would say, that's pretty good, but I need to see it again. I just need a little bit more proof, right? So which one are you? But then Jesus responds with, your sins are forgiven. Or he says, stand up and walk. I want to land here for a second. I don't want to go past this. Your series right now is on grace. My friends, this is what grace looks like, and this is what grace sounds like. It sounds like the phrase, your sins are forgiven. It sounds like the phrase, you are forgiven. That is what grace sounds like. It is the belief that there in your forgiveness is your healing. Now, what's interesting, and I hope I'm not stepping on a point that I'm coming to later because it's coming to my mind now, but what's interesting is on the mat is the man, and Jesus doesn't say, I heal you. Sometimes he does that. Later on in the Gospels, he does that. You're healed. Go, be well. In this case, he doesn't say, you're healed. He says, I forgive you. Forgiveness is the healing of the man. It's in the act of forgiveness that he is able to stand up and take a different posture and walk again. I forgive you were the words that he said. Stand up and walk. Now, I want a small moment of clarification because sometimes people blur the lines here, and I think it's really important to say that forgiveness and reconciliation are different. And it's important that we recognize that they're different because forgiveness is a healed heart. Reconciliation is a healed relationship, a restored relationship. And I think sometimes we hear about forgiveness and we think that means walking back into relationships that aren't to be restored. Not all relationships are to be restored, but every heart is to be forgiven. So the call is different, and I think it's a really important a distinction for us to make because it's not always safe for people to restore their relationships. But it's always safe to forgive. Are you with me on that? Really important. Here's why I think. Because forgiveness heals us. And forgiveness heals others. And it extends the healing. Have you ever heard the phrase that unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die? Yeah. Forgiveness is all about the healing of all parties. Reconciliation is a different thing altogether. Healing actually gets us out of prison. There's a story in Matthew, a few books over in the Bible of this. It's a parable. It's a story Jesus told to illustrate a point, right? He's real creative like that, and he tries to illustrate points. And it's the parable of the unforgiving debtor. What happens is that the king has a servant who owes him money, and he goes to the servant and says, come on, where's my money? You owe me the money. And the servant says, I don't have the money. And the king just goes, it's okay. I forgive you the debt. You don't ever have to pay it back. It's all good. And in the next moment, that same servant who's been forgiven goes over to the person that owes him money and says, where's my money? Give it back. And the guy goes, I can't pay it. And he says, it's not good enough. And so he starts to, and he does not forgive their debt. And then it talks about how the kingdom of heaven is actually like the king, the one that forgave the debt. And that this guy's locked himself in a prison. Well, the king puts him in a prison, but really he puts himself in a prison, doesn't he? Because any time that there's unforgiveness, it's like putting ourselves in a prison and taking everyone else down with us as long as they can, locking everyone else away with us. So this idea of it gets us out of prison. It's the thing that extends healing to the other. Because there's a fundamental misunderstanding of grace. Grace by very nature cannot be squandered or greedy. It can't be given. This man did not understand grace when he accepted the generosity of the king, but he had no understanding of grace, because if he understood it completely, he never would have gone over to this person to ask them to forgive the debt, right? He would have stood here and gone, wow, I can't believe the lavish generosity. I can't believe the indiscriminate, beautiful thing that's just been given to me. I have that. I didn't deserve it. I love it so much that I can't wait to give it to somebody else. That would have been the interaction they had if he had understood it. So there's this real sense that, he didn't understand really what was being given to him. He was just looking for the free ride. So he was all about putting somebody else in prison. So there's this disconnect with the understanding of what grace really is, what forgiveness really is. This is not to say that forgiveness is easy or that it doesn't hurt. This is not to say that you will forgive once and it'll be all over. Forgiveness is actually a journey. Sometimes you have to forgive the same person 20 billion different times every single day, right? We all know this. We all live in a world where we have to do a lot of forgiving. And forgiveness will come at a cost to you sometimes. It will. You'll have to let the thing go that meant a lot to you. You might need to forgive a debt and expect to never get it back. You might need to forgive the thing that happened to you that you had no control over. But the mission is what? Always greater than the cost. The mission of grace is always greater than the cost. And you know what? Forgiveness offers you more freedom than your bitterness ever will. And who doesn't want to walk in freedom? But sometimes, boy, we like to hold on to our bitterness like a security blanket, don't we? Keeps us warm at night, keeps us company, gives us energy. But forgiveness will offer the freedom that bitterness never will. Forgiveness is more prevailing than your vengeance. Forgiveness is more reconciling than your resentment. Forgiveness is the act of freedom. You know what? It's not lost on me today that the name of this awesome gathering, the name of this awesome building and complex is Grace Gate. What an amazing name. This church is the gate of grace. That means this church is the place of forgiveness. Free, offered to anyone that walks in its doors. To me, it makes you guys the friends that carry the people on the mat. That's kind of how I'm visualizing your church today. When I think about the name of it, I'm like, those guys are the ones that carry people on the mat to Jesus, because they're the gate of grace. They're the forgiving church. They're the people that give grace lavishly, indiscriminate. What an awesome name to have. What a great challenge to live up to. That mantle of forgiveness. You know, church, there's always going to be limits in the way when we try to access Jesus. There always is. If you're here today and you're just kind of curious about this Jesus thing, make no mistake, sometimes it's not going to be easy to get to him, because there's going to be all sorts of blocks in your way. Some of your own stuff, some of your own addictions, some people who say they love Jesus and then don't act like they love Jesus, you know? There's going to be blocks in the way on the way to Jesus, but that is the place where you'll experience forgiveness to the point that you won't be able to help but stand up and go and forgive. Are you with me? Our access to forgiveness, our access to grace. Make no mistake, there'll always be a reason not to come. There'll always be a reason not to forgive. There'll always be a reason not to extend grace, because you'll be able to go, there's always that sentence in our mind when we're going, forgive. But if that conversation, I don't even need to finish the sentence. You know where I'm at, right? We all have that conversation going on, if not out loud in our head. And the devil will make sure of that. There will always be someone that's trying to measure your worthiness to determine whether or not you follow the rule book and if you heal in the right way. You know, somebody else will say you shouldn't have forgiven them. They didn't deserve it. There will always be blocks on your way to Jesus. There will always be reasons not to forgive. But in times like that, it's time to gather up your support crew and say, I'm going to have to get on the mat. I need to get on the mat because I'm having a hard time forgiving. And I need you to carry me to Jesus. Put me in front of him so I remember what he did for me. So then I can't help but get up and go and do for them what he did for me. I love that Jesus didn't say you're healed. I love that he said you're forgiven, and there was the healing. I think sometimes the times where we can't forgive are the times where we have forgotten what happened for us on the mat. Are you with me? The times where I'm having a hard time with my colleague or my spouse or my friend or the person, the random stranger that just pulled over in front of me in the traffic, you know. The times where I cannot forgive are the times where I've lost sight of what it was like to be on the mat. And in that moment, my prayer needs to be, Jesus, get me back on the mat in front of you so I can remember what you did for me, so that I can hear you say again, you're forgiven, and I can get up and I can be healed and I can walk around and I can heal other people. There are times where we forget what it's like to be on the mat, and there are times where we forget to carry other people on the mat. And our calling is to be both. Our calling is to look for access to Jesus no matter what the blocks are, to be the people that carry people and to be the people that are willing to be carried. Because that's actually what's going to make us different to the rest of the world. Our vulnerability toward each other, our community with each other, our ability to go, you know what, none of us deserved it. I didn't, you didn't, but let's just do it together. Let's just bring each other to Jesus together. Let's not worry about what the blocks are. And then when we have what we have, let's bring other people and let's not let anything stop us from putting people that Jesus loves in front of him. Yeah. Then Jesus said, and I love this, verse 24, I will prove to you that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. And then Jesus turned to the paralyzed man and he said, stand up, pick up your mat and go home. This is my favorite bit. Pick up your mat and go home. The man had lived on the mat. Imagine the stench and the stain of his life that's on this mat. He was confined to the mat. He couldn't get off it even if he tried. He couldn't get off it in order to come to Jesus. So imagine how much of his life has been spent on the mat. You get freed from the thing that you are despising, the way that you can't live anymore. What's the first thing you're going to want to do? You're going to want to get as far away from that mat as possible. Am I right? You're going to want to leave the mat behind and you're going to want to walk away and forget it ever happened. Well, Jesus does something interesting. He says, pick up your mat. Why? Here's what I think. Here's my theory. He said that because he's saying to the guy, pick up your story. Pick up the thing that's going to remind you of what I did. Pick up the thing that's going to remind you of where you were and now where you are, and carry that mat with you so everyone can see the evidence of me in your life. And you know what's going to prove the evidence? When you free other people from their mats. You tell other people not to be confined by the bitterness and unforgiveness. It's the thing that gives him the power to know the thing that happened. It's his reminder. It's his story. It's his memory. Every single one of you have a mat. You have a mat. You have a story. You have something that has trapped you. You have something that has confined you. You have something that has limited you. And today in this room, I believe Jesus can say exactly the same thing to you that he said to the man on the mat. You're forgiven. That's free. He did that already. That happened a long time ago. You just haven't realized it yet. Okay, you're forgiven, but I think he's going to ask us to do the same thing. I think he's going to ask you to pick up your mat and go home. Pick up your mat so you can tell your story, so you have your reminder, so that the next time you're up against something that is hard for you to deal with and you having a hard time forgiving somebody, you can remember how forgiven you were. And it's with that mat in your hand that you can say to that person, I forgive you. It's okay. It's okay. Because the stench and stain of my life is no worse or better than the stench and stain of your life. And in some way, we're all confined on the mat. I love that part of the story. I'm so glad he didn't say, leave the mat behind. He says, pick up your mat, stand up. See, the first thing Jesus does is he forgives. And that forgiveness brings healing. See, first he saves us. Then he heals our lives. The cool thing about this is that he's already saved us. We're just not always aware of it. We're just not always present with that reality. And so at that point, when we're healed, we're no longer the same. The man's no longer the same. He can stand. He hasn't been able to stand for a long time. His posture's different. He's upright. He can walk into the world in a different way. When you're freed from your mat, your posture changes. You walk differently. You look at things differently. Your perspective is different. This is what Jesus does for the man, which heals him. But imagine the witnesses in the crowd that day after they've kind of done with their cynical conversations and whether Jesus followed the rule book of healing or not. They witness this. So that's healing for them. There's always a ripple effect when forgiveness comes into action. When grace is given freely, there's always ripples. When we walk out of this room today, freed from our mat, there'll be a ripple effect in our community, in our lives, with the people that we interact with. That will affect how we live at home. When we truly understand, when we don't misunderstand, when we truly understand that moment with Jesus ourselves, the extension into the rest of our world will be undeniable. Stand up and pick up your mat and go home. It says in verse 25 and 26, everybody watched as the man jumped up, picked up his mat, and he went home what? Praising God. Everyone was gripped with great wonder and awe. Everyone, the cynics, the judgmental people, the curious people, when they saw what happened with the man, everyone, when people see what happens with you, everyone will notice there's a difference. We've seen amazing things today. Can you imagine the worship in that room? It's different than the half-hearted worship. That's right, I'm here to remember that God did the thing for me. It's the whoa, I can't believe it kind of worship. That's a different kind of worship. The singing is a little bit uncontrollable. Nobody really follows the rule book with the dancing in that moment either. You know, the joy just takes over. And whoa, the worship is so authentic. So let's not forget this. Who healed this man? Who healed him? Jesus did. He healed him with his forgiveness. And his friends were the vehicles that brought him to that place of forgiveness. This makes me think that those friends must have known what it was like to be forgiven. Those friends must have known what it was like to be on their own mat at some point in order for them to have that heart for their friend to bring him to Jesus. They knew where to bring him. His mat became the reminder of the forgiveness and his healing. It became his offering to the world. It became his story. And Jesus is offering you the same thing, my Grace Gate friends. He is offering you the exact same forgiveness. He already has offered it to you. The question is do you want it? Do you want it? In a full, gracious, full-bodied way that's going to have a ripple effect in your world. Do you want it? Do you need to be reminded every day, that's right, he took me off the mat so I can let that person off theirs. He took me off the mat so I can carry that person to Jesus too. He took me off the mat so I can offer forgiveness. Might not be healthy for me to still be in a relationship with them, but I can offer them forgiveness because that will free me and it will free them, and then there's potential for healing. Our worship is different in those moments. Our worship is authentic in those moments. So my question to you today is, who are you in this story? Who are you in this story? Where do you see you? Today you might be in the crowd. There might have been another day when you were on the mat. I don't know. Who are you? Are you in the crowd? Are you blocking other people from coming in? That would be a very confronting conversation to have with yourself if you're somebody that feels like you're blocking other people from coming in. But you know what? Forgiveness is offered to you today. Forgiveness is offered to you today if you're the block. Are you the friend doing everything you can to bring people to Jesus? Are you carrying a lot of mats and so you're feeling a little bit weary and you just need a little more energy to carry a few more mats? Are you on the mat? Do you need healing today? Are you the one concerned with who's going to fix the roof? I think we're all of these people at different times in our lives. I don't think we're ever just one. But today I'm wondering if I might invite you to become a little bit like the friends, to get creative on how you're going to carry people to Jesus. Offer forgiveness. or to be the person that's willing to lay on your mat in front of Jesus with all of your shame and the stench of your life and let him heal you. Let him heal you. So I love it if in our song today, if in our moment of praise here in a second, we can be people that are like ripping the tiles off the roof. You know? Access to Jesus any way we can get it. Because when we leave this room, there are people that need us to carry them on mats to Jesus. And when we leave this room, there are some people that are going to need to join a life group, so you can be really honest about the fact that you need to get on a mat today and be forgiven so you can extend forgiveness. So I'm thinking what we'll do during this song is we'll sing together. I'll invite the praise team up. Is that okay? We'll sing this song together, and if you're somebody in the room today that is feeling compelled or convicted that A, you need to be on the mat, or B, you want to be the carrier, you want to be the friend, then I'm just going to ask you to come and sort of sing the song in the front section here, because I'd really just love to pray specifically over you when the song's over. Is that okay? So just whatever the Spirit's saying to you, pay attention to it. We'll sing, then we'll have prayer over those things. Is that all right? Okay, let's do that. All right. Every part of me is one of these people that never wants to make the room feel uncomfortable. But while I was standing there singing that song, I feel very compelled that there are some people that are standing in their seats that really want to be at the front. So I'm going to just ask you to walk forward, because I want to pray for you. I want to pray for you if you need to bring your mat. So if that's you, do your thing. I'm not into guilt trips, but I don't want you to miss the moment. This is your spot. And I'm also very aware that there are people in the room that are like, I need to start carrying people and I haven't been brave enough. The crowd blocked me out. The crowd blocked me out. So pastoral team, if you just want to gather and lay hands on some of your people here. The crowd blocked me out, now I need to be brave again. If that's you, I want to pray for you. And anyone else that's standing back there in the chairs, this is an invitation for you. If you want me to be praying over your life and over your conviction this morning, I'm just going to ask that as we pray, to open your hands. Just take a posture of open hands, just being willing for the Spirit to work in your life. And then let's, in unity, let's just all pray together, okay? Jesus, you offer forgiveness to every person in that room, the cynics, the judgmental people, the curious people, the people that are just wondering what's going on. But you have the heart for the person on the mat, and you have just the affirmation for the people that are bringing the people on the mat. And we gather here in front of the altar, not that we have a real one, but just because we just believe, Jesus, that you are who we approach. You were on that altar. And there was a point at which you already forgave us, and we've just forgotten. And today we're choosing to press into that forgiveness. So for those people that are here in the front, Lord, that are like, I'm on the mat. I need healing. I don't want to be forgotten. Do you see me, Jesus? For those people today, Jesus, you say you are healed. For those people today, you say you are forgiven. And God, I pray that with that forgiveness, they have the courage to pick up their mat and tell their story and just share that forgiveness with the people in the world around them, in their immediate lives, just anybody. God, just give them that. Give them that. May they be confident in your forgiveness. May they not go back and wonder if they're ever forgiven again, because they're forgiven. And that happened when you died on the cross. And every day remind them of that. And there are people here at the front, Lord, that are like, you know what, I need to start being that friend. I need to be the person that brings people to Jesus. I was healed and I was on the mat, but I've forgotten now that it's my job to bring other people, to forgive other people, to not be blocked out by the crowd. And so for those people, God, give them courage. For those people, God, show them who. Show them the person that they need to carry. For those people, God, give them what they need so they can bring others before you. And for this church, God, may it always be a gate of grace. May it always be an open place where people come and experience forgiveness and love that's unconditional, because let not a person in this room forget that they were given that. So we can't help it, God, now. We just want to give it away. Remind us every day. Forgiveness can be a process for us. Be patient with us. Keep reminding us of what you gave us so we can't help it. In Jesus' name I pray, and everybody said, amen, amen.